Hey everybody, welcome back. It's Kirk, your humble host here. Just some housekeeping things out of the way before we get you to the episode. We have rebranded DeFi Revelations to a new title. It's called Proof of Vision. Same content, same me. We're going to be talking with founders across the space and diving into the business case and the technical parts of what they're building. So really excited for this kind of new journey that we're all on as a Alea Research. So we appreciate you guys staying tuned in. Today we've got Terrence. He's the founder of Humanity Protoocl to talk about, I think, obviously a WorldCoin competitor. If you know about WorldCoin, Alea Research is personally bullish on this sector because we do think that there will be demand, and it is a significant upgrade over traditional KYC and kind of dinosaur KYC methods. So there's a lot of market share to be won in that space still. We talked to Terrence about why they built it, kind of the strategy for adoption. I thought was very, very interesting. Their implementation of ZK proofs to keep people's privacy, secure, was another thing that really, really stood out to me. And Terrence has some very controversial thoughts at times on things, which I enjoy. I thought he had a very good strategy for how they were going to go and lead to Humanity Protoocl's adoption. So hope you guys enjoy the episode. Obviously, if you do, please like and subscribe, and we will see you next time. All right. Welcome everybody back to, I guess, the first episode of Proof of Vision, formerly known as DeFi Revelations. Really excited to kind of be back into the swing of things after the holiday, warming up for a very, very hot Q1. With me today, we've got Terrence, the founder of Humanity Protoocl, to kind of kick things off, to talk about what you guys are building. How are you doing, Terrence?
Very good. Thanks for having me, Kirk.
Yeah, absolutely. To get the audience warmed up and kind of set the context, for Humanity Protoocl. Let's talk a little bit about like your journey personally into the space. How did you discover blockchain? When did you decide that you were going to build, a protocol on blockchain rails? Let's talk about that journey a little bit.
Yeah, so I was born in the U.S. And then I actually grew up in Hong Kong, and then I did my undergrad back in the U.S. And then dropped out of school to start my first company in the technology space when I was around 19, 20 years old. It was not in the blockchain space. I wish it were, because then Bitcoin was pretty cheap back then. I started a company in the travel and hospitality space. And the whole thing was you look at hospitality, hotels. A lot of technology is very archaic. Right, you go in, you see that phone. It's probably 30 years old. You go to the same hotel, you check in, 20 times you've been there. They still ask you for your passport. The receptionist could know you for God knows how long, but you're still checking in with your passport, credit card, waiting in line every single time. So I started a company that was building tech for hospitality, and it grew to a pretty decent size. So we were deploying both hardware and software into hotels. Hardware, so we were doing like in-room smartphones, tablets, that sort of thing, and on the software side, we were doing sort of payments, analytics, property management systems, et cetera, et cetera. It grew that to having deployed hardware in 80 odd countries, over 1,000 employees, and was servicing around five and a half thousand hotels, 500,000 hotel rooms, and it was doing well. And then sort of COVID hit. Unfortunately, that business, folded as a result, because the hospitality industry was pretty much wiped out for a good couple of years. But I think one thing that I did was there were a couple of things that I did. One is that I learned quite a fair bit in terms of like building product, building software, building hardware, distribution, operations, et cetera, et cetera. And then the other thing that was serendipity. I actually got involved in crypto back in 2017. Like just through some personal investments and whatnot. Unfortunately, when the company was going down, I actually sold everything in 2020 to try to save it. It's very funny because literally yesterday, my mom was found an envelope with keys with passphrases for a wallet. Gave it to me and asked me, "Oh, what is this?" I'm like, "Oh, I gave this to you a couple years ago." And then I was like, okay, you know what? I kind of know what it is. I looked at it. I then typed it back in recovery passphrase. There were tens of thousands of Ethereum in there that I look back, it was sold in, a couple years ago. So essentially, for me, after I had to fold that business, I was like, okay, you know what? Identity is something interesting. Travel, that made me realize how important it is to have sort of reusable credentials and fungible credentials, and then sort of what happened with me actually trying to sell everything to try to save the company made me realize, okay, shit, this is the industry I need to be in. And then so decided to really go all in and solve one of the things that I think a lot of people have been talking about, but nobody have really been able to deliver it, right? Nobody's really been able to deliver, which I think is sort of blockchain based identity, decentralized identity, and we started working on that a year and a half, 2 years ago. We've now launched our test net a couple months ago, got a couple million people on board, and we're targeting sort of a main net in Q1, Q2 this year, and then also looking at sort of a TGE around this time frame.
Nice. Yeah, thanks for the context. You're the first founder we've had on here that said that the way that they got into the space was by selling their crypto bags. So that's a first for us.
It's very painful. It was very painful to be reminded of that, because
Yeah.
it was always in the back of my head, but for some reason, like literally, it was actually just yesterday. My mom passed me the envelope, because it was in an envelope and it said "important, do not lose."
Oh,
And then I knew what it was, and then I decided to go check just in case, and no surprises.
yep. Yep.
Um,
Hey, listen, it takes conviction to go through something like that and then be like, you know what, screw it, I'm gonna go back in, I'm gonna rebuild everything, I'm gonna go into this industry full time. It takes a lot of gumption to do that. Um, so I guess in terms of what you guys are building, right? Like, personally, myself, along with our research team, actually, we're very optimistic and bullish on the tech. I think that you guys are building, right, and the subsector you guys are building in. Obviously, a lot of people know about WorldCoin. We're personally bullish WorldCoin as well, because we think that there is going to be demand for that technology, right? Especially as the world moves forward. So I guess, with that in mind, right, I think you probably answered this 1,000 times, but can you kind of frame, Humanity Protocol? When did you guys decide you were going to build it? Did WorldCoin have any kind of an influence on the way that you guys design things? Let's talk about the birth of Humanity Protocol a little bit and why you're building it, I guess.
Yeah, so we've been thinking about identity for a while. I'd be lying if I say that WorldCoin didn't have any influence. I think there are a number of different protocols and projects in the crypto space that have had influence on me and the team. And then also, sort of traditional companies in the tech space, non-tech space, where we've drawn inspiration from. In terms of Humanity Protocol, the way we think about it is that we're building a blockchain where credentials is a core part of it. Okay. And from our perspective, it's called Humanity Protocol. What we call, in terms of consensus, is called proof of humanity. But proving that you're a human being is only one part of it. Okay. When we think about sort of humans, I think this is the existential crisis for a majority of people in this world, in terms of humans versus AI, probably didn't really kick in until ChatGPT in the last year and a half, 2 years, right? Like, AI is going to eat the world, all that sort of stuff. People have been talking about for years, but like, you're like, okay, you know what? I don't really understand it. And then like when you can prompt ChatGPT and it comes out, or Anthropic or whatever, and it comes out with like stuff that like somebody very knowledgeable would have taken a couple hours to put together and it takes it 30 seconds, then you're like, holy shit, this is going to be insane, right? And then you look at sort of all the deepfake videos, all the voice generation, right? The fact is, I don't really know if this is Kirk. It might be like it might be a deepfake version of Kirk, where it's just controlled by AI, right? So it's really difficult to know any of this stuff now. And so from our perspective, I think when we decide to build Humanity Protocol, it's about, number one, starting with the very core, all the different attributes that a human has. Down the road, it could be everything from your nationality, your age, where you went to school, where you work, blah, 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 that sort of stuff. But actually starting with like whether you're human or not. Right. And obviously in the offline world, there's no question about it. But in the online world, it's now becoming a bigger and bigger problem. Right. So we decide to start with that, and we get compared a little bit to WorldCoin. Obviously, they're much earlier than us, much bigger than us. But the idea is, okay, you know what? The way we looked at it is that ultimately you do need an offline component in order to be able to verify that sort of a digital counterpart is a human being or not. And the simplest piece is biometrics. And then we looked at different sort of biometrics. Obviously, WorldCoin uses the iris. Many parts of your human body is unique. Okay, in fact, your face is definitely unique, but like, you have doppelgangers and all that sort of stuff. Like, your fingerprint's unique, your iris is unique, your palm print is unique, your palm vein's unique. Different sort of things are unique, and then we ultimately settled on the palm because we think it's a couple things, right? Number one, it's not very intrusive, and most people don't find it too scary at all. And then the technology is relatively mature. If we look at, even in the US, you have Amazon sort of doing, palm-based payments in Whole Foods. In China, there's Tencent also using palm-based payments solutions in Shenzhen and a bunch of different places. So we decided to go with that as sort of the very first thing for proof of humanity. And the other cool thing about using something slightly more accessible, such as the palm vis-a-vis the iris, is that there could be use cases like payments, access control, ticketing, different sort of things where it's relatively simple to implement, right? And then for us, that's sort of the very first thing. But then we are actually already starting to work with different sort of what we call in Humanity Protocol is identity validators. So ultimately, these are different sort of entities that can verify certain things, right? It could be a financial institution that can verify that you're not sanctioned, and you're a KYC customer of them. It could be your university issuing a graduation certificate or transcript saying that you actually graduated from the school with honors, you didn't get kicked out of school, and this was your GPA, et cetera, right? Or it could even just be, a company, Animoca, issuing credentials saying that Yat actually is the founder and chairman for the firm, right? Or, that intern actually has worked, 6 months at Animoca Brands. Right. So what we think is that with all this, with all the technology coming out in AI, it's going to be much, much, much harder, differentiate truth from fiction. Right. And what we're trying to do is sort of create a network where we can ascertain certain things about various people, starting with whether you're a person at all to begin with, and then down to many different sort of attributes. Think of it as sort of data enrichment, right? And that's what we're trying to do with Humanity Protocol.
Pair Protocol is the first and only trading platform for narrative trading. Their technology unlocks the ability for anyone to pair trade. For example, if you think ETH will outperform Cardano, you can long ETH ADA in one click with leverage. Or perhaps you think Pepe will continue to outperform Doge. You can long Pepe Doge. Again, all in one transaction. The combinations are endless. Learn more at beta.pair.garden. Gotcha. Yeah, I want to go back and talk about the iris versus the palm verification for a second as well. So I guess the first question I have is, I mean, do you guys view it as, I mean, we mentioned obviously all the deep fakes, right, with AI when it comes to like facial recognition. Do you view that as from like a security standpoint? Do you think it's easier to game like an iris verification versus a palm verification? Is that one of the reasons why you made kind of that design choice? Is that one of
I
the
think
reasons why you made
in
kind of
a
that
scenario,
design
let me put it
choice?
this way: in an isolated scenario, people can do whatever they want. Everything's pretty easy to game, frankly. That's why, sort of similar to WorldCoin, we're also rolling out Humanity scanners in physical locations for people to go do their activation. Right. What's a little bit different though is that we are also rolling in an app where people can just directly use their smartphone and do the enrollment just by scanning their palm print. The hardware component adds the vein component to it. But ultimately, we do think there's a need for sort of physical enrollment in order for us to be sure that you're not gaming the system. But then in terms of when we think about sort of accuracy, right? Whether it's your fingerprint, your palm print, palm veins, your iris, a bunch of different these things, in sort of perfect capturing conditions. You know what I'm saying? Like everybody's, it's 100% unique, right? I think one of the key things in terms of sort of having the physical location to do so very much ties with ensuring that the control and the registration is in conditions as perfect as possible. So that's sort of how we think about it. I think for us, the decision between iris versus palm has more to do with sort of use cases, in the sense that we actually think, I'm probably going to be comfortable if I'm comfortable enough to register my palm. I'm probably going to be comfortable enough to use that as a method to pay for something or to access a Taylor Swift concert, for example. For me, even if I'm comfortable enough to go scan my iris for, to get a world ID, I'm not sure I want to be, having somebody sticking something near my face every single time. So that's probably the other consideration.
It's a good point, from a user experience perspective for a second, right? I mean,
Sure.
the iris scan just feels like very like dystopian, right? Like Minority Report dystopian society, right?
Yeah.
Where they're scanning your face, everywhere that you go to access everything, right? And yeah, and so it feels that way, right? Even obviously, not saying WorldCoin is intending it that way. It just feels that way from a user experience standpoint. So I think you've got a point there, in terms of like the user experience as well, right? I mean, and do you guys, I guess, in terms of like the mobile app versus the physical location too? I guess depending on the use case and depending on, I guess, like I don't know, the escalated manner of what you're verifying your identity for.
Exactly, right? Like it really. So we want to make it simple enough that maybe there are certain use cases where the people don't actually have had to gone to a physical location, right? Like, certain things you kind of don't really care about, et cetera, et cetera. It might be the case that, hey, you know what, the just a print is good enough. And then there are certain use cases where you might, and then for us, right, like it escalates beyond that. As we said, right, like we're building sort of credentials on chain, so it might be the case that just because you prove you're a human being, that's not even enough. We might even, we're now starting to discuss partnerships with traditional TradFi firms that want to issue credentials on humanity, because they've spent all this money KYCing people, might as well issue credential, right? And then we're also talking to DeFi protocols where they're like, okay, you know what? There are trading firms that kind of want to trade on us, but they want us to KYC users because of regulatory reasons. We don't really want to KYC users, and we don't really care about KYC users. The main thing that we really just care about is whether this guy or this address belongs to somebody that's sanctioned, right? So there is a universe where potentially Maybe it's enterprise DeFi platforms that simply say, okay, you know what? There are investment products. We don't care who you are. We don't have to KYC you, but you better show a credential from some financial institution saying that you're an accredited investor, right? Or at the very least, you're not sanctioned from North Korea. Right. So these are, and then, I mentioned like companies, education, different sort of things, right? Like, as you know, even in crypto, there's so many frauds and, like people pretending to be other people. I was talking to a journalist at one of the bigger sort of publications. And he was telling me that a bunch of people, he got a bunch of people paying him because somebody else was pretending to be him on Twitter, and then messaging projects to ask for, a 200 USDT to be featured on the publication and all that sort of stuff, right? So proof of employment is interesting. As an entrepreneur, when I hire people, proof of education is important. Proof of employment is also important, right? Like, so there are a lot of these things where we think in the future it becomes more and more important.
Let's talk about the ZK proofs and how they kind of keep people safe, right? They keep their personal information safe while, obviously allowing it to be shareable. Let's talk about that to kind of round out the product a little bit.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting, right? Like if you think about the offline world, when you go to a bar or you go to a liquor store and you want to buy something, the storekeeper might want to say, okay, you know what, I want to check your ID to verify that you're above the age of 21. And one of the key things is that obviously your driver's license or whatever ID contains other pieces of information that you don't necessarily want the person to know, right? Like your name, your actual birthday, certain licenses, your address, so I think one of the interesting things in this case for us is that different sort of pieces of information hash and stored on decentralized storage. And then when it comes to the credential, when it comes to sort of presenting the credential, right, you're only presenting sort of the pieces of information that you want to give permission to, right? And the way we've structured it with identity validators and what we call ZK proofer nodes, where they're running the proofs, is that you get to choose certain things that you want to, certain questions or presentations that you want to answer to. Right. It might be the case that, hey, you know what? There's a credential that's issued for Kirk, and then the singular question that we're asking is, are you over the age of 21? Without necessarily revealing your age, right? Or it might be, are you American or not? Or are you sanctioned or not? Are you a human being or not? Without necessarily having to reveal other pieces of information, right? And I think this is something that will be tremendously useful. As I mentioned earlier, people want to verify certain things, verify whether things are true about you or other people, but then you might not actually want to give all that information out, right? You might only want to selectively present certain things, and that's where we use zero knowledge proofs.
Gotcha. So one of the big questions I have about this kind of like this technology and like I guess the road to adoption is almost similar to currency, right? People transact in the dollar or whatever currency in their country, but primarily let's talk about the dollar because it's been so dominant. They transact in it because they've done it for so long that there's this like Lindy
Sure.
effect, right? And there's it's trusted and it's been going on for so long. When it comes to like this next generation of identification, it's almost an uphill battle of like adoption, proof of concept, education. But at like the jurisdictional level, you've got to get the government to buy into that,
Not
proof of
necessarily, right?
humanity. Yeah, how do you think about it then? Yeah.
Kirk, I actually sort of disagree on that. So if I think about sort of businesses, right? Like you look at whether it's in the Web3 world or
Yeah.
Web2 world, a lot of businesses are sort of what we call two-sided markets. You take something like Airbnb, right? If you don't have users or like people who want to stay in places, it's really hard to sign up hosts, right? Like if you come up with a platform and say, hey, you know what, why don't you come here and you can book places to stay. If there are no places to stay, you're not going to go sign up for that place. And then on the other hand, it's really hard to convince hosts to put their places on the platform if you don't have users, right? So there's a chicken and egg problem, right? And then so I think one thing that's interesting with what WorldCoin's doing, obviously, is sort of a UBI thing, right? It's call it UBI, call it an airdrop, call it whatever, right? Like, but getting people to sign up and then giving them some sort of token incentive is a very natural way, given that crypto uh, crypto has sort of value almost from day one, and liquidity almost from day one, right? But I think that is sort of one of the routes that we are taking. We will take, but it forms a very small part. Forms a small part of that. I think the other way for us to think about this is almost in traditional tech, what we call a B2B2C sort of model, where we are actually already engaging in conversations with applications that want to use that have a need for proof of humanity, right? There is a platform that we're building now. I mean, it's pre-launch, but it's called Airdrops.com. Right. So imagine, a project wants to do an airdrop. They kind of want to make sure it's not a bunch of farmers controlling, 30,000 addresses and whatnot. The idea is that, okay, you know what? We have sort of a capability where we say, okay, you know what? People who sort of have the proof of humanity credential, only those people get to claim an airdrop, right? Or they only those people get, the full airdrop. Otherwise, your airdrop is like, I don't know, 90% discounted. Right. So that itself, the fact that we've created this utility, when we start working with projects will naturally bring their people on board. Okay. And then that's on the sort of application level in terms of bringing on users. And then on the other side, we are also speaking to different sort of institutions where they want to become identity validators, right? All the way from universities that want to issue a graduation certificate or a transcript on humanity, to companies that want to issue credentials on humanity, saying that, okay, you know what, this guy's an employee of ours, this guy's not, right? Or this guy has worked for us before. Think about what I mentioned earlier about journalists, right? Like it's there's a natural need for some of these entities to go verify their employees, their students, whatever it is, right? So I think whether it's sort of we call it the direct to consumer model, where we're incentivizing people and whatnot, getting them on board, or it's working with applications or developers that actually have a need to use something like this, where they're bringing on their community, or even on the credential issuance side, where by definition they also have a need for this. So we're attacking this problem in multiple ways, right? I think sort of the government side of things, where I say, okay, you know what? Because the U.S. government has issued a credential on humanity saying that Kirk is, has a U.S. passport, and then the Swiss government recognizing that credential and letting you in. I mean, that's a pipe dream. Like, I would love for that to happen, but like I'm not banking on that, right? Like I think that will take quite a fair bit of time. And just so, like, if we think about sort of even what Ripple is doing, right? Obviously they're pretty, they're garnering quite a fair bit of attention. They want to try to fix Swift, but they're not saying, okay, let me go work with Swift or go work with all the constituent banks of Swift to go figure out how to fix this thing, right? But it's like, okay, you know what? We might have a better alternative. We might have like some other workaround, so that it sort of solves, right? So I think from an identity perspective, it's sort of in the similar ring.
No, I get it, and it makes sense. So I think you answered my question there. Then, right, is that there's multiple ways to think about like that strategy, and I think starting with proof of concept and like in like market segments that you guys can attack and control first and foremost, and then obviously, you go on, and if you're talking to a government or you're talking to an agency on that level, and they see that you've already got this business built out, right? You've already thought about it. You've got you've got institutions, on your side, such as, financial firms, universities, et cetera,
or even
all
just a lot
using
of
this
people.
thing.
or even just
Yeah.
a lot of
Yeah.
people,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yep. Nope.
it's
Makes sense.
like if you have a good 30, 40, 50, 60, 70% of a city, of the country, or whatever, that's using this for various use cases, whether it's online or offline, it could be a catalyst for governmental involvement. But as I said, right, like that's
Yep.
it's like saying, what, BTC only has value because it becomes a strategic reserve. Like
Right.
that's I think it has even more value if it does become a strategic reserve, but it has value in itself, right? So that's how we sort of think about this.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. So, and I guess like segueing into, I guess, your guys' traction and the adoption of it so far. So, I think I've seen some numbers. I think it's something like 2 million
I think
addresses that or
that
people have
two
signed up.
million was a little bit. 2 million's a little bit outdated. I think it's
Yeah.
like 2.9 something million now. I think probably in the next day or two it's going to hit 3.
So
Yeah.
let's talk about that a little bit. I mean, is that the primary fruit of working with apps? Like talk about the
No, not
strategy
yet.
there for the user so
Not
far.
yet, right? That is still very much organic. People telling each other about it, referrals.
Hmm.
As I mentioned before, we haven't launched the token yet, but there is sort of a gamified referral system with on-chain points. Our testnet, we're seeing a lot of transactions. I think it's like anywhere from 1.5 million to 2 million transactions a day. People kind of just sort of crypto people being crypto people, let's say, and being excited about something like this. But then one of the key things is that over the coming weeks, months, we will be working with a lot of different partners, both on the credential issuance side as well as the application side, to ramp up the utility, really make people understand what we're trying to do here.
Yeah, I think in particular, like I guess obviously coming from a crypto lens, we spend a lot of time in DeFi, over at Alia Research. So I think like the airdrop mechanic is very very interesting. When you look at the amount of resources that are spent like defending against Sybils, I think Layer Zero like went on record with like all of the crazy stuff that they were doing to try to like guard against Sybil attacks for their airdrop, right? And it's a time and money pit, right, for their airdrop, right?
It's not,
It's
yeah,
it's a
it's
time and
funny
money
because
money pit, right?
Brian's actually an investor in Humanity. Uh, and then one of the few sort of partnerships that we've publicly announced is actually with Layer Zero, right around the time when they were doing their TGE. And then I was discussing with Brian, and then we were talking about how something like this is really necessary. It just so happened that we haven't even launched our testnet yet, so we couldn't really service them. But when we think about sort of airdrops, right? It's rewarding existing users, and then also it's rewarding existing users, and then incentivizing people to really learn how to use the product, and ultimately build long-term value, right? And unfortunately, much of blockchain is anonymous, pseudonymous, and it doesn't really cost much to whip up 2,000 addresses and start go farming stuff, right? So I think that's a very key use case. One other thing that we're also doing, even though we are our own, layer 2 on Ethereum, whether it's through layer 0, or whether it's through layer 0 or oracles, the intention is for us to actually service a lot of the other blockchains, in terms of credentials and proof of humanity. And the way I sort of think about this, which is maybe a little bit controversial, is that I do actually think, obviously historically, when in the last cycle, you have like apes, right? Like when Bored Apes was doing their airdrop, for the NFTs, or for the ape coin, Ethereum got clogged, and then gas fees went up the wazoo, right? And so the way I think about this is that, in fact, technically, I think any single blockchain, whether it's existing or anything new that's upcoming. Yeah, so I think the one thing that a lot of people haven't really thought about, is that I truly think that technically whatever blockchain, whether existing or upcoming, okay, that talks about lower gas fees or higher TPS, Okay. And historically, I think that's one of the key things that people think is preventing wider adoption of blockchain. Ethereum is super expensive, or TPS for Bitcoin is very low, right? Um, my view in general is that, especially in there's no incentive to go bot Bitcoin. Like, even if you have Bitcoin, like sending it left and right and all that sort of stuff, kind of doesn't make any sense. Ethereum, it kind of makes sense when you want to claim a big airdrop, or you want to mint NFTs or that sort of thing. But my view is that for any blockchain, frankly speaking, the lower the gas fees, and the higher the TPS, it pretty much won't matter, in the sense that if there is ultimately going to be a financial incentive, and it doesn't have to be the airdrop of the chain itself. It literally could just be if somebody was building something on top of that chain and decided to give out a bunch of value. Okay. That blockchain will get bought to shits, because, frankly speaking, the cost of botting something is very low. Right. Like, you look at DDoS attacks in the traditional web world. If I want to take a website down, I can just send 10,000 servers and pumping it with traffic, and then that's why you have stuff like Cloudflare protecting websites, right? But then in the blockchain space, you don't really have that. You can't really block transactions. You can't really prevent me from creating a million Solana addresses with a script and just keep sending transactions through, right? So ultimately, what we actually think is that there does need to be somebody that creates infrastructure so that something like Cloudflare could exist, where you are prioritizing transactions based on some sort of credentials, or based on some sort of criteria. And it might be the case that it's prioritizing transactions based on the fact that you're a human, right? And then maybe it's a dApp where it actually wants to say, we're prioritizing transactions for certain things, for certain nationalities, for certain people of certain ages, or people who, just addresses that carry some sort of credential, right? So I think, because a lot of blockchains have not had very wide adoption yet, and then there's not that much economic value being sort of delivered. A lot of people have also not thought through the fact that, frankly, it doesn't matter whether you have 100,000 or a million TPS. To bot that is very, very easy. People don't bot Visa or MasterCard because it costs you 200 bips to go do so. Do you know what I'm saying? I'm not going to go bot Ethereum because it costs me $3 to do it every single time, right? But you know what? If there's a chance that I get $5 out of it, I'm going to go do it, right? So that's why I think even the proof of humanity piece is going to be important for other blockchain ecosystems. And the problem in terms of solving is not really just TPS and gas fees.
Vertex is a lightning-fast order book DEX offering spot, perpetuals, and money markets with unified cross-margin and a vertically integrated product suite. With Vertex Edge, users can tap into the power of shared cross-chain order book liquidity across Arbitrum, Blast, and Mantle, while earning trading rewards in VRTX, ARB, and MNT. Traders can access over 50 spot and perpetual markets alongside the GMCI 30 and meme indices, with low-fee trading and capital efficiency, all while preserving self-custody and on-chain settlement. Learn more at vertexprotocol.com. I want to take us back to the hardware bit of it for a minute, right? I think you mentioned, coming up here, you're going to have some partnerships and some integrations announced for the hardware piece, where you're distributing these for use, obviously in the real world. Let's talk about that a little bit. What industries are you guys targeting to start, when it comes to the hardware, and how are you guys going to plan on, I think, protecting against like fraud? I think we saw it a little bit with WorldCoin with the scanners, right? In some of these countries, right? People were, paying people $1 to scan their eye, and use their phone, for the transaction or whatever it was. How are you guys thinking about that?
So I think there are two answers to that, right? So number one is that we are planning to actually we're distributing. So we have like sort of the enrollment process where it's going to be largely self-operated to start. And the team has already sent out a bunch of devices, and they're operating in a bunch of different cities now as sort of a test case, and bringing people on board. Um, in terms of actual sort of verification usage, the intention for us is to start partnering up with events. You know, maybe even just crypto conferences to start, right? Because it becomes an interesting thing. And then the other thing is also access control, right? So we have a couple different form factors. There's a device that looks like a terminal. There are devices that almost looks like a door access lock, and then there are devices that are you can plug into your own device, your own smartphone. Um, I we actually I don't know when you guys are planning to publish this, but I could share that as of like today. Next week, we're actually deploying some devices into a public hospital in Hong Kong. Yeah, where it actually acts as the access control for certain areas for doctors. Okay, it's really interesting because like historically, access control people were using cards, and then they realized, okay, you know what? Going into your wallet, picking out a card, taking it out, and then tapping it is inconvenient and not very hygienic. And then it could also be stolen, right? And then they also looked into using like facial recognition, which doesn't work very well when everybody's wearing a face mask in the hospital. Um, and then so we've decided to do a pilot program with the hospital, which is actually owned by it's a public hospital owned by the government, so it's with the hospital authority in Hong Kong. So that's a pretty cool use case. And then, as I mentioned, whether it's events, access control, and then down the road for payments, right? So that's how we're sort of pushing through those things, starting with small pilots and then hopefully ramping up from there. In terms of fraud prevention, I think that's where it's also a little bit interesting. Unlike sort of the iris, as I mentioned before, we have sort of two components to it. There's going to be a mobile app, which is sort of right now in beta testing. A bunch of our investors have already played around with it and tested out and all that sort of stuff. And then there's the hardware piece. So what is interesting is that we're actually capturing two parts of your palm. There's the palm print, which is really just a surface level, okay, patterns and creases of your palm. And then there's also the palm vein, which is actually the blood vessels underneath. So that requires dedicated hardware. The scanner, the hardware itself actually captures both of them. Okay, we can allow you to actually use your smartphone through the app to capture the print first for sort of enrollment, and to be fully activated as a verified human, you actually need to capture the vein and the print through the hardware device also. But what this actually creates is a scenario where I could actually do re-verification very easily, even with your own smartphone. One of the biggest problems with the iris scan is that you scan once and it's registered to World ID. Then the scenario where I was reading an article about people in Berlin, where there's a bunch of gangs or whatnot getting refugees, getting homeless people to go scan, and then giving them phones, tying it to there, and then giving them 30, 50 euros, and then taking over the account. That would be impossible to happen, because simply for us, we can do re-verification whenever we want. We can ask you to go re-verify your palm print directly through the smartphone app on a daily basis, if need be, right? So I think that's sort of one of the more unique things about using this as a form of biometrics. So there's two levels to it, rather than simply saying, okay, you know what, there's the iris scan, and then we can't redo it, more conveniently redo it, right?
No, interesting. And I guess, it goes without saying, right? I guess to segue into it, right? That, you know, if you're using, proof of humanity to verify your identity, if you're signing up to use this application, there's incentive involved, right? Kind of the WorldCoin model, where they're incentivizing people to sign up and use it. So let's talk about that a little bit. I know you guys have a token coming up on the horizon. What's the utility for the token, and what's the incentive plan moving forward for that token? Because I think one of the things I always worry about when it comes to kind of deep in general, is just that there's got to be some kind of a supply sink somewhere to offset.
Sure.
I think if you're giving it away as an incentive, right? So let's
Absolutely,
talk
right?
about that a little bit.
Yeah, you kind of don't want to just be like printing your own money and giving it away to everybody with not much utility for that, right? So I think for us, that's why there's going to be sort of there's going to be sort of rewards and incentives for people who have signed up, and then down the road there's an allocation for people who continuously sign up and go verify themselves. I think that's one piece of it. But then in terms of the actual utility, obviously we have our own layer 2 where the H token is going to be the gas fee token. And then beyond that, it's actually also going to be the currency for a verification. Right. So what I mentioned earlier is that if an app wants to verify something about Kirk, you would have to give permission. But what happens is the application would actually have to pay a small fee in H tokens in order to be able to gain access to that information. And then the ZK proof for nodes would get a small rev share. The network would get a small rev share, and then whoever actually issued the credential would also get a small rev share, right? So the idea is that's why, like, imagine a use case where, for example, an enterprise DeFi lending platform, let's say, wants to make sure that, okay, because it's there's some investment product that they want to put on there, and they want it only accessible by somebody that's not sanctioned and verified to be an accredited investor, and maybe above the age of 18. Right. And obviously, they might also want that to be a human being, let's say. Right. So in that case, what happens is, in order for you to access that app, you'll have to sign a bunch of transactions where you give permission to show those credentials. Maybe a financial institution has proven that you are not sanctioned. Maybe it's that same financial institution that has said that you are an accredited investor. Maybe it's some government entity that has said that you are above the age of 18, right? And then it's the Humanity Foundation that has said that you're a human being, right? And so what happens is that there's a verification fee that's going to be paid by that app, and then the ZK proof for nodes would get a share of that. The network would get a share of that. And then everybody who actually issued the credentials to enable this verification would actually also get a small fee. So we're creating sort of an economy where we're incentivizing entities to issue these credentials, and then applications are able to pay a small fee to make use of these credentials, so that it becomes, there's utility from day one. So that it becomes,
Gotcha.
there's utility
Gotcha.
from
Yeah,
day one.
It makes for an interesting use case for sure. For these tokens, it's always cool to see how people are playing with the tokenomics, right? And I think the utility of things. But Terrence, it's probably a good place for us to wrap. It's been a fantastic conversation. Any closing thoughts before we wrap the show up? Fantastic
No,
conversation.
thanks for
any
having
closing
me.
thoughts before
We're
we wrap the
super
show
excited about what we're building. I think for us, the identity space is super important. I think, and people were talking about it during the ICU days about all the different crazy use cases and whatnot. I think back then it was a little bit early. Now there's hundreds of millions of people who are now familiar with blockchain technologies and crypto. I think AI is eating up the world, and it's becoming more important to verify things. I think the combination of blockchain and what we're building is going to be super important. We're very excited about you know uh, all the growth we've seen in the testnet. Do appreciate everybody's support, and we're also very excited about sort of TGE and mainnet very soon.
Absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, if you're watching this or listening to this, obviously, take a look at Humanity Protocol. You can find it at humanity.org, and you can go sign up for the testnet and kind of get involved. And then on X, they are at Humanity PROT. So really, really appreciate it, Terrence. Appreciate your time. It's been a fantastic conversation, and we'll have to do it again sometime.